Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. We've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. Got Big Jeff, with me again here on a Tuesday night, ready to talk about all the happenings of the Big Ten. Got a few little news and notes to talk about today. So, we're going to talk about the DeMarco Murray situation, possibly being the Penn State running back coach. There's a rumor about Matt Patricia, the old former Patriots defensive coordinator, interviewing for the defensive coordinator job at Ohio State. We'll talk about that. We have offensive line returning production for every single Big Ten team. Excuse me. This is something that took a little while to work on, but it's something that I think is really relevant and going to be interesting for us to look at. So we're going to talk about that, and then finally, we have Jeff's 5 questions for Big Ten football in 2025. Big questions for us to focus on, for us to talk about. It's going to be a great episode. Jeff, we're so glad to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, JR, and thanks again for scheduling us during an Indiana basketball game. I'm a Indiana fan, but they're not fun to watch. So I appreciate the fact I don't have to watch bad Indiana basketball. Thank you, JR.
Yeah, I'm just out here doing my best to help you out. So anything I can to help you out, I'm here for you.
Just to remind, I am located in Atlanta in the heart of SEC country. I have my own website, bigjeffsfootball.com, where I post many different types of analytical type articles. And then on X, I'm at Big Jeff's FT Ball. You can see that here on the screen. And pleasure being here again.
Yep, glad to have you here. Go check out Jeff's stuff. He's nice enough to come in and share some of his stuff with us on here, but he also does other work as well, written content that you also might enjoy as well. So yeah, go over there and check it out. All right, Jeff, we have some interesting stuff to get into. We don't have a ton of topics today, so we should have kind of the ability just to kind of bounce around and see what we can do and be a little bit more lackadaisical with our time. But we'll see how we go. Our first topic to talk about is that DeMarco Murray is actually a candidate for the running back coach job at Penn State. This was reported by Pete Nakos of On3. He said he's emerging as a candidate. If you recall, last year, Ohio State lost their running back coach, Tony Alford, and DeMarco Murray seemed to be a rather large candidate for that job as well. So, possibility of DeMarco Murray wanting to get out of Oklahoma, things not going well in offense, kind of hard to know exactly what's going on here, but I think this is a really interesting story. Jeff, let me ask you, if they did land DeMarco Murray, would this be a home run hire, good hire, would it be a questionable hire? What's your thoughts here?
I won't say it's a home run hire because last week we did a truth on the Big Ten on coaching, and there's no such thing as a home run. But JR, refresh my memory. Wasn't Ohio State kind of hot after him potentially in the past as well?
Yeah.
He has really, really strong recruiting chops. I know that. I really think, though, given the uncertainty of the Oklahoma situation, in James Franklin, despite some people not loving how he's not performing in the Big Ten games, in the biggest of the games, I should say, it's a stable situation at Penn State, and it's not at Oklahoma. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he made this leap. I'm not sure if that staff there in Oklahoma, they're in the SEC. They play Michigan this year as well in the non-conference. So, for job security reasons, I'm thinking this would be a good hire. And for Penn State, given his recruiting chops, former NFL running back, right? That's always a big play with recruits. I think it would be a very good hire.
Yeah, I mean, DeMarco Murray made it from the Lincoln Riley kind of switch up over to the Brent Venables, coaching hire there. So I have a reason to believe that if, say Brent Venables did get fired, they would probably still hold on to him. But at the end of the day, like, how many head coaches do you want to work for at one place? Like, you go to your DeMarco Murray, Oklahoma's his alma mater, correct?
Yes.
I'm not
Yep,
making that up. Okay.
definitely. Yep.
So you go to your alma mater, you want to coach there, but at the end of the day, if it's not the best fit because you keep losing your head coach. That's not very much fun. So it's definitely an interesting situation. I believe DeMarco Murray would be a really really good hire. I'm with you. I don't know about home run just because of your truth from last week, but this would definitely be one that I think would go really well for Penn State this year. As DeMarco Murray, I mean, he has a history at Oklahoma of getting three, possibly even four running backs 200 yards or more in a season. He's had two rushers of over 1,000 yards in his time at Oklahoma, and he was at Arizona, I believe, in 2019 and did a good job there as well. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this would be a really good hire, and this would be somebody that would really work well with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton.
Yeah, I think for sure it's a hire that wouldn't be a bad hire, right?
Yeah.
Can't say slam dunk, but very positive for Penn State and kind of add to their momentum. And the coach two really good running backs in their, in essence, senior year. That would have to be pretty exciting as well, right?
Totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, how likely is this though, right? Like if we talked about Ohio State was interested in him last year, that kind of like afterward it kind of felt like maybe he was just trying to get more money from Oklahoma and he did get a contract extension, I believe, after that. So like, I mean, if you're DeMarco Murray, you're not hurting for money. I'm not sure if his main objective here in coaching is the money, but at the end of the day, like if you can make a little bit more, why not, get a little bit more. So, but if he just got a contract extension last year, can he really get another one this year? Like, I don't know. What's your thoughts here, Jeff? Is this realistic? Is this not realistic? What's your thoughts?
I think the interesting thing with any of these coaching hires is, and it's never talked about, is like, what does the wife think, right? And things like that. Like that really matters because in college coaching today, any assistant, you're doing just fine, right? So it's a matter of how much is it about the money? If so, then go get the money and you can get more money. But so it's the intangible things, like, do they love living in Oklahoma? Do they have kids in school and they don't want to pull them? All those things are factors. I mean, Tom Allen, I think he wanted I don't know if he loved the environment at Penn State. And I'm not saying that as a negative, but Tom Allen is a unique guy. I could just see him hitting it off with Dabo, kind of a religious vibe to them and everything. Just in those factors are something that it's hard for us to project, right? So Jay, I have a hard time saying for sure if he would take the position, but if you're talking from a pure football perspective and job security, I think it would make total sense and he should make the move. But all those other factors could say, why don't I just stay here? We enjoy Oklahoma. We're staying put, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like family is obviously a big factor in this stuff, and that's something that we unfortunately can't really gauge. I guess I say unfortunately. I don't know if fans need that much access, right? Like we have so much
Yeah.
access as it is. We don't need to know the conversations between the coaches and their wives. But I actually was thinking very close to what Hummus Hero here is saying. Hummus Hero, thanks for being here. Billy Tuesday, Pitt Snipe Husker, thanks guys for being here. Seeing you saying hello in the chat, we appreciate that. Glad you're here. He might want to advance to be an offensive coordinator or eventually a head coach and thinks this is a better path. I mean, I I can't disagree, right? I mean, you look at what happened with Michigan when they won their national championship and how many of their coaches went off to get jobs elsewhere that were upgrades from where they were, not so much as like one school to another, but like status wise from position coach to coordinator, stuff like that. And then you saw it with Ohio State this year too. Like Ohio State had to give Brian Hartline and Keenan Bailey, bigger roles so that way they wouldn't leave for bigger roles elsewhere. They're contemplating giving defensive staff bigger roles so that way they don't go elsewhere as well. So if things go really, really well for Penn State this year and they win the national championship and say Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen both have over 1,000 yards, you best believe DeMarco Murray's going to start hearing some offensive coordinator calls or maybe even some head coaching jobs somewhere else or maybe even have the NFL coming after him. He could be one of those guys that says, I'm tired of the college game. I'm tired of recruiting. I'm really good at it, but I'd rather get back into the NFL and just coach some dudes up who know what they're doing.
Yeah, this is a great point that Mr. Hummus Hero made here. the opportunity also to get exposed to a different coaching staff and different ideas, different thoughts about how to attack winning. It's why people would just kill to be on Saban's staff, and they know they were going to be taken through the ringer, and it was going to be a hard job and not a lot of fun. But you want to talk about a resume builder and then what you learned on the job that you could apply to other things. And it just makes you much more sellable. So that's just a great point there. And sometimes you can get a little stale just beyond, is my coach going to be around the next couple of years? Do I want to be exposed to new ideas of thought on how to be successful to make me a more well-rounded coach? So I think that's a great point by the audience member there.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. And, he might be thinking to himself, I had this opportunity last year with Quinshawn Judkins and Travion Henderson. Am I really going to let this slip, through my hands again? And the other piece of this too, I was doing some looking up on recruiting and stuff like that. From everything I could tell, DeMarco Murray, Penn State was close up there in his top contention when he was trying to pick where he wanted to go play football after, if I'm not incorrect. So, I mean, he went to Oklahoma, but could there be a possible draw here? Because, he at one point in time wanted to go to Penn State, didn't go there. Obviously doesn't regret it. It led to a very nice NFL career for him. But, could there be a thought about, I never got the chance to go to Penn State? Who knows? So
Yeah.
I think it's likely that this could actually happen. I think if Penn State can push all the right buttons with career advancement, stuff like that we talked about, I think it could be huge for him. But at the end of the day,
just
we
a
won't
final
really know
thought.
until we see.
Let's face it, it's a heck of a lot more fun being a coach if you're winning a lot versus Oklahoma maybe going 500, the pressure cooker of it. I mean, that just can't be any fun. That just has to be.
I totally agree. How funny would this be, though, after Penn State pulls the rug out from Oklahoma and gets Jim Knowles? And then they go and they take Oklahoma's running back coach and get him as well. There's going to be a big Big Ten rivalry brewing, or Penn State Oklahoma rivalry brewing if coaching staff changes if this happens.
It's a dog eat dog world out there, that's for sure.
That is. So, all right, guys, thanks so much for giving your thoughts there. Doug Shepard is here. Doug, we appreciate you being here. Says he hoped Locke stays for a long while. Yeah, I think Ohio State was okay that they landed Locke instead of DeMarco Murray. And that's nothing against DeMarco Murray. DeMarco Murray is a very good coach, but Coach Lachlan, he just has done a really good job for Ohio State. Speaking of Ohio State, Jeff, there was news that came out. What was it? Kind of a little bit last night, and then it made its way to the national media pretty much, at the midpoint day today, that Ohio State interviewed Matt Patricia, the former Patriots defensive coordinator, two-time Super Bowl winning defensive coordinator. He also was offensive coordinator for the Patriots for a year, or was he a year or two? I don't think that went very well from what I remember. So, he probably not going to get an offensive coordinator job anytime soon, but he had a stint with the Eagles. That didn't really work out. He's been out of football coaching for about a year or two, if I'm correct. There's a lot of Ohio State fans that are upset about this. There's other Ohio State fans that are kind of like, well, let's give it a shot. Let's see. Jeff, what's kind of your thoughts on this whole situation here? Ryan Day choosing to possibly not go with maybe an internal hire, to go with Matt Patricia as well. And then also the rumor that DJ Durkin got his contract extension because Ohio State was wanting to hire him, the Auburn defensive coordinator. I mean, what do you make of Ohio State pursuing guys like Matt Patricia and DJ Durkin?
So, first of all, when you showed me that this was going to be a topic tonight, one of the first articles I just looked up, some person was saying, if Ohio State makes this move of getting Patricia, it would be a total disaster. I would just say, just like there is no slam dunk home run hires, there's nothing to say, oh, that would definitely be a disaster. I think that's a ridiculous statement. Do I have concerns? Yes. But, the allure of getting coaches with NFL experience is strong. Bringing a coordinator into the college level that has NFL experience has been successful by many, many teams, including Ohio State's biggest rival, of course, Michigan. And the other thing is, obviously, Patricia coached under Bill Belichick, probably many consider the best defensive mind maybe of any coach of all time. For some consider him, right? That was really the success is his expertise on the defense, and then he had a coach as a quarterback in Tom Brady, and you end up with 6 Super Bowls or whatever it was. So, Bill Belichick doesn't hire someone and keep them on their staff unless they're really good at what they do. Now, definitely have a concern though with him, being out of the game a while, not being a defensive coordinator. I think he played a role actually doing some offensive play calling for the Patriots, which is really kind of unusual in my mind. Even though that didn't work out, I think he learned a lot from that. I know he was a head coach and not successful, but I'm a big believer in from your failures, that's when you can learn the most. Just look at Ohio State. From their failure against Oregon, they made changes and all of a sudden had this elite defense. And then the Michigan loss, and then they parlayed that into a championship. So just because someone has some failures doesn't mean, they wouldn't have learned from that. So bottom line, I don't know if this is good or bad. To say it's a disaster to me is ridiculous, though, but it does have risk. The other thing that was brought up with Patricia is, his personality is going to rub you wrong. He's not going to be a great recruiter. Heck, I don't think Jim Knowles was a big recruiter for Ohio State. He had a great defensive staff under him, and that defensive staff was doing the heavy lifting on the recruiting. And I think that's the case for a lot of these. I don't think Chip Kelly was a huge, great recruiter for us, right? Despite being an excellent play caller. So those are my thoughts. Kind of a mixed bag, JR. I'm not saying I love it or hate it, but there's some things you can say this could work out pretty good, right? Bringing NFL ideas to Ohio State's not a bad thing. And then, there's other things to say, well, maybe this is not the greatest idea.
Yeah, I've been very cautious about how I view this Matt Patricia, kind of smoke here. Obviously, it's just an interview. We'll see what it comes to. But I think Billy Tuesday's right. Like Matt Patricia would be a polarizing hire for Buckeye fan base. It's true. Like there are so many that are so much against it. There's others that are like, well, he is an NFL guy. Let's see what he does. And Ryan Day makes good hires. Let's see how Ryan Day's hiring does with it. I will say, I think it really went south for him when he went to Detroit and didn't go well there as a head coach. And part of that, I'm not making any excuses for him, but I just do think this is relevant to point out. Part of the issue there was he didn't treat the media well. And when you don't treat the media is going to try to bury you as much as possible. Not just the media members you're rude to, but like the media does kind of look out for each other in some ways. I'm not going to name any names here, but earlier in the season, earlier in the season, after the Michigan game, Will Howard was up doing his press conference and somebody asked him a question and he kind of gave like a snarky answer back to one of the reporters. And I was listening to another reporter talk about the situation and he said, well, I always thought Will Howard was a nice guy, but then I saw him treat that media member like that. And, now I just think he's a terrible guy. And I was like, Will Howard has been excellent in press conferences and everything all year long. Like he gives one answer that you don't like that maybe was a little bit snarky and like didn't exactly go your way, and then now you're just gonna write him off as like bad dude. Like I don't know. So there definitely is an aspect to that, and I do wonder how much of this kind of media shaping of who Matt Patricia is negative because of the way he treated the media. You talk to players, there are some players that say they don't like him. Guess what? There were also some players that said they didn't like Chip Kelly. I was listening to Bobby Carpenter on his show earlier today. Bobby Carpenter played a year or two for the Patriots. He was there. And when Matt Patricia was the defensive coordinator there, he said he loved Matt. Said Matt was great, highly intelligent, did a really good job communicating, was a good teacher, and he didn't have any complaints with him. Now, maybe he just really liked Bobby Carpenter, and that's why he didn't have any complaints. But as far as I'm concerned, I do want to be careful how much I read into some of what was said about Patricia before, because it could just be media bias of we don't like the way he treated some of our, you know, other media members out there.
What's interesting about that comment, I didn't even think of that, but think of who he was under, Bill Belichick. Think of Bill Belichick's news conferences, right? He was like
And Bill Belichick
intentionally.
could afford to do that because he won Super Bowls, right?
That's
Like,
the difference. That's the difference. When you're winning, you can do whatever the hell you want. Just ask me about, Bobby Knight. I'm an Indiana guy, but so yeah, so Patricia's like, well, that's the way you do it, right? And it gets the learning process, and I'm sure he'd probably do it a little different if he had to do it all over again. And there can definitely be media bias. I mean, the media hated Urban Meyer too, hates Urban Meyer, right? Um,
but
and
he
they
won.
loved it when he went to the pros and fell on his face, right? They
Yep.
loved it. And so um, the other thing with that is, you could be a great coach in college. Maybe it doesn't work out in the pros. For him, he wasn't a great coach in the pros, but maybe he's one of those guys he's a damn good ball coach as a coordinator, right? Where that's he's game planning, right? Doesn't have to worry about too much about recruiting. Maybe that's a good fit for him. So, yeah, I don't know what to conclude on this. I can see Ohio State fans being concerned, but he's still pretty damn intriguing to me, given that strong NFL and then coming from the Belichick tree, so to speak.
Yeah. I think if Ohio State made an internal hire to be co-defensive coordinator with him, I would feel better about it. You know, like maybe Matt Guerrieri is the co-defensive coordinator and he's the one calling plays, and maybe Matt Patricia is just, pretty much the scheme guy that really goes in deep and, kind of like Jim Knowles was, where he just kind of sits in his office and does scheme all day, and lets the position coaches really be the ones that teaches it more than anything else. But again, like he could also be one of those people, and I know I'm making a lot of excuses for Matt Patricia here. I'm just trying to give a different angle because I feel like the angle of would be a terrible hire has been pretty far out there. Like most people are aware of that, and it's been spoken about a lot. There's also the angle of he's learned his lesson now, right? Like he's learned his lesson. He's not Bill Belichick. He can't treat the media like that. He can't treat his players like that. And so maybe he comes into Ohio State and he tells Ryan Day, I want to be better at treating my players the right way and doing this and doing that. Like I recognize I'm not Bill Belichick, and who knows, maybe the Buckeye culture does more to change Patricia than Patricia does to change the Buckeye culture.
Right. I mean, they're bringing him in to saying, here's what we need you to do. We need you to game plan. So when we're playing Oregon, we stay
Yep.
one step ahead of them, because in the first game, they were one step ahead of us. We played them again. We were definitely one step ahead of them in the Rose Bowl. Right. So it's like, and if he doesn't have to worry about all these other things tied to, and this is going to tie to one of my big questions and what I'm proposing for one team, but when you're, the head coach, you have so much to manage. It's hard to be an offensive and defensive coordinator versus a head coach. The responsibilities are quite different between those two jobs. It's kind
I
of like
agree.
night and day, to be honest.
I agree. I agree. A couple comments to get to really quick, and then we'll get to our commercial and then get to our offensive line stuff. We got Yankee Wolverine. Yankee, thank you for being here. He says, I was sorry to see DJ Durkin leave Michigan and really sorry to see who replaced him. I forget who replaced. Do you remember that, Jeff? Who replaced
No,
Durkin? Was it
no,
was it Brown?
that was a while ago, because he left to go to Maryland, right, to be the head coach at Maryland. Durkin,
Yes.
he went
Yeah,
straight
you're
there,
right.
and
Yeah.
then that
Yeah, I don't recall
was it
who
one of the young
replaced him.
guys, the one of the
I'll,
young.
I'll look it up during the commercial.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
look it up during the commercial. We got Doreen here. It says, "Hey Jr. and gang, hello Doreen. Thanks for being here, Doreen. This is Jeff. Jeff has his website that he writes on. So I know you love all the Buckeye and Big Ten and stuff like that content. So go check out Jeff's content. What's the URL for it again, Jeff?
Bigjeffsfootball.com.
There you go. There you go. So everybody go check out Jeff's content. He does a good job. There we go. Doreen saying hi, Jeff. There we go. We much appreciate Doreen here. She does a great job helping other people know more about podcasts and everything. Does good work. So, all right. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. One more. Let's see. I can't find it. Oh, here. Pit Snipe Husker says, Saturday is a solid bet. JR is correct. The media is fickle. Outside of Ohio State, we'll all hate him. We'll rue the day we didn't hire him. I mean, Ohio State media can be like that a little bit too, but and I get it sometimes too, right? Like sometimes you're just trying to ask a question when you're a media member, and to have a coach or somebody like, try to embarrass you, it's like, so I'm not so much blaming the media, but at the same time, I'm like,
It's a two-way
like
street.
this, yeah,
Yeah.
let's not try to destroy somebody just because maybe they were in a bad mood that day because they just lost a game, like it is what it is. I get in a bad mood when I don't have a good drive to work. So, it would be it really suck for me if I had to go in and talk to media after a bad drive to work or something like that. So, all right, everybody, we're gonna hit commercial really fast, and then we'll come back. We'll talk about returning offensive line production in the Big Ten. Some numbers I think that will be pretty shocking for some of us, and be some really interesting talking points for me and Jeff and you in the comments as well. We'll be right back here on the Big Ten Huddle. Have you ever wanted to watch all 22 film, that film the coaches watch? Well, now you can. Introducing the Coaches Film Room. Over at Minutes to Sports, former college coach Zach Smith breaks down film of the most relevant teams in college football with a bit of a Big Ten lead. It's not free, so you'll need to sign up for the Colonel tier, which is $25 a month, but I can attest to you that it is far more worth it than that. With about 4 to 8 games per week, this is worth so much more money, not to mention Zach's analysis, making you a smarter football fan. Go check it out. The links are in the description, minutestosports.com. You won't be sorry. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle, we appreciate everybody being here. Please do like and subscribe. Definitely helps out the channel, helps the algorithm, all that stuff, and you'll be notified. We don't just do live streams. We do like other videos and stuff like that during the week as well. We have a basketball channel where there's basketball content there as well. You guys can go check that out. I know there's a bunch of basketball games going on right now in the Big Ten, but if you are so inclined to maybe watch both, maybe you can do that. Go check out the Big Ten Huddle basketball channel over there as well. All right. Jeff, Big Ten projected offensive line total career snaps for the entire 5-man offensive line. Northwestern, far and away above everybody else. One of the reasons why they are far and away above everybody else is they have a transfer from South Dakota State, I believe it was, Evan Bierston. He is like in his 5th or 6th year, and he's been starting for a long time now. Xavier Gray is actually in his 6th year right now. He started playing college football in 2019. So he has over 2,000 snaps. Jack Bailey has over 2,000 snaps. And then their star offensive lineman from last year, Caleb Turnen, he has over 2,000 snaps. Their lowest snap count offensive lineman is Azamo Oriataka. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. He is most likely going to start in a redshirt freshman, so he has only about 150 snaps on the year. From there, you have Illinois. They have a lot. Oregon comes in with a lot of snaps as well, so that's a big one. And then from there, it goes Rutgers, Nebraska, Indiana, Minnesota, Penn State, Wisconsin, Ohio State, USC, Iowa, Michigan State, UCLA, Maryland, and then your bottom 3 are Washington, Michigan, and Jeff, I think most people could guess this one, Purdue. So this was really interesting information to me. I don't think it's going to exactly pertain to this is the best offensive line because obviously talent comes into play as well. But so much of offensive line play is development, getting onto the field, working together amongst each other as a group. What are some of your big takeaways from seeing these kind of stats here, Jeff?
So this is the first time I've seen it. My thought is any team in the 4,000 through 5,000, 5,500 range, you probably got 3 starters back, would be my guess, right? Because I know I'm familiar with Ohio State. They probably got 3 starters back. That's pretty good, right? I mean, Penn State with high aspirations, it'd be great to be more. And once you see over that 7,000, you're talking 4 starters there. And then Northwestern. The other problem with me saying starters, JR, with transfer portal, you got people who are virtual starters, right? They started many times somewhere else. They're coming to your program and they're super experiences. You could kind of call them a returning starter. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, but offensive line stability is a huge thing. It almost derailed Ohio State's season, quite frankly. I mean, I kind of laugh. People think, what happened against Michigan? It just drives me crazy when people don't forget that it was just before the Indiana game the prior week that they lost Seth McLaughlin and had to rejigger their line all over again. Against Indiana, they weren't very good offensively. Going into the Michigan game, Ohio State coaches didn't have a lot of confidence in their offensive line, and the game plan reflected it. And then Will Howard had a bad game, and that's how you end up. And then Michigan has a great line. So, but my point is, going back to this, is that, a stable offensive line is just huge. We saw it in the Super Bowl, right? I mean, the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl because they won one-score game because their defense was awesome, and their defensive coordinator did an awesome job. They're kind of holding their offense together with Band-Aids a little bit, especially on the offensive line. Once they faced a great defensive line, similar to Ohio State when they faced Michigan, the Chiefs looked like a bunch of, like, what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of going on here, JR, but, offensive line stability and experience. Next to quarterback is the only position that is more important as far as amount of experience than offensive line. Is the bottom line. So
yeah, totally agree. And some of these offensive lines have been together more often, like Illinois. That offensive line has been together pretty much, for multiple seasons now. I think only their right guard has been kind of in and out, and he's not even a transfer. So Brandon Henderson, I think that's who it is. At least that's the information I got. I was actually surprised with Oregon and their offensive line with their returning snaps. Now they brought in transfers, so that helps. Isaiah World's been starting for a good amount of time for Nevada. Alex Harkey, their right tackle, he started only 1 year for Texas State. So outside of him, you had Poncho, Emmanuel Pregnon. He comes in from USC. He's got a lot of starting experience, over 2,000 snaps experience, over 2,000 snaps in his career. So Indiana as well, they're one that's up there. Zen Mikulski really brought their numbers down because he's only had, pretty much the snaps from Ohio State this year in that Nebraska game. Outside of that, he's not really played all that much, but they do have a lot in Kahil Benson. Pat Coogan has over 1,500 snaps. Carter Smith has over 1,500 snaps. So really, really interesting to look at this information. It kind of justifies what I've been saying about Michigan, especially in the transfer portal, that I expected more experience out of the transfer portal for Michigan. Right now, it looks like your tackles for Michigan are going to be a sophomore and a freshman. Evan Link and what's the other guy's name? Andrew Sprague. Now they're redshirted, so that does make a little bit of a difference. But at the same time, like, they only have one offensive lineman who has over 1,000 snaps in his career, and that's Giovanni Alhadi. I mean, if I'm Michigan, I got freshman quarterback Bryce Underwood coming in. I would have made it a huge priority to go out and get experienced offensive linemen in the portal, especially with the type of money that I have. But obviously, they didn't do that. Sharon Moore believes, I guess, in his guys to be able to train and develop. We'll see how it goes. But for me, it was surprising to see Michigan that far down there, especially knowing they have a true freshman quarterback coming in who is most likely, if not he's going to start at the beginning of the year, he's probably going to start at some point this year.
Yeah, and given how the key to their national championship is how they replenish their offensive line with great transfers. I mean, they nailed their transfers going a couple years back when they won the Natty. On the flip side, they are doing a good job of bringing in really good recruiting to that defensive front, right? Maybe not transfers, but recruiting to it. But that is a concern for sure when you see them kind of lower on the list there in the Big Ten, and them wanting to bounce back. They still won 8-5 overall, right? A lot of great momentum for sure.
Right.
But
And
there's
Greg Crippen is coming back. He was, he didn't start all of last year. I think he was probably the better center between the two that they had there. Evan Link did do better as the season went on. That Texas game kind of gave him a bad rap because he allowed a number of pressures in that one, but he got better as the year went on. So, I mean, it's just a really important offseason for Michigan's offensive line development this year because like I said, they just don't have a whole lot of guys who have played a ton of snaps in college football. That doesn't mean they can't be good, right? Like snaps aren't everything, but it is definitely something to watch, especially with a team that relies so much on the run and is going to most likely have a true freshman quarterback at some point starting this year. Any other teams on this list that kind of stuck out to you, Jeff? I mean, were there any teams that maybe based on this data that you think will maybe have a top 5 offensive line or maybe a bottom 5 offensive line next year?
no, other than what you hit on, I mean, one of the biggest questions, Illinois, they're in the top 15 in the all too early top 25s a lot. Some people have them in the top 10. It's going to steal a little thunder. They have 18 returning starters. That was one of my notes and everything. So it only makes sense. They've got probably 4 returning offensive line starters based on that statistic there. That's big because that's backed by a quarterback going into their third year, Altmaier. So, Illinois could be a team. I heard some people say Illinois this year could be the Indiana. It's a bad analogy. Indiana came from nowhere. Illinois is not coming from nowhere. But could it be another non-blue blood making the playoffs? In that regard, yeah, they're Indiana-like, right? But in Oregon too. So then that's really interesting news because they're going to likely have a first-year starter, right? Isn't Dante Moore I have down as the most
Yeah.
likely starter there? He's got experience, just not a lot of playing experience, but he's been in a couple different systems. So it's not like you're bringing in, he's like a third-year guy, right? Even though, and he did get some playing time at
Started most of the
UCLA.
year. Yeah, started
Yeah,
most of the year under Chip Kelly, but I think he got, some injuries here and there that kind of limited his time. But he did play a good
yeah,
amount as a freshman, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that stands out. And then, Nebraska and Raiola, looking to take the big step in year 2. Often you'll see that the second year in starting for a quarterback is huge. The first year you could take a 5-star and they're still going to be up and down, right? I don't care how talented they are. Trevor Lawrence is probably the only guy that just nailed it like his freshman year, his first year. Everyone else, but having that stability of a strong offensive line. I mean, you saw in the Super Bowl, as great as Patrick Mahomes was, his footwork was horrible. He was like, didn't trust things. He was moving up in the pocket when he should have been doing something else. I mean, if you don't have that stable offensive line, things just go south.
Yeah, Dylan Raiola can dress like Patrick Mahomes, but don't move in the pocket like Patrick Mahomes was in the Super Bowl. Okay, don't do that, Dylan
Yeah.
Raiola. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I do think Penn State they're bringing a number of guys back. Their snaps are a little misleading because they did have like Nolan Rusi. He started about halfway through last year, so he doesn't have as many snaps, but he was a part of that offensive line that got them their run. Drew Shelton is coming back. He's probably going to be their left tackle. That's huge for them to have a reliable left tackle who has over 1,500 snaps in his career, and then the guard. I'm terrible at pronouncing his name, but Alavega. Iane. I don't know how to pronounce it. I apologize, but he's going to be a really good guard for them. He was good for them last year and should be again. So, and then Minnesota. Minnesota did a good job of going out and get some good transfer offensive linemen. So, really, really good stuff there. All right, let's get to a couple comments really fast, then we'll move on to Jeff's questions for the Big Ten. Billy Tuesday said Preston Stone should be well protected. Might be fun to watch. I agree. Yeah, Zach's been really high on Preston Stone. So I'll have to make sure I share this with him because that'll help him even more. They've got like I said, 2 guys on that offensive line that are like 5th and 6th year guys. So that type of experience is going to be invaluable for them. Not so much playing together, but for them to be on the offensive line. Michigan Manifesto says definitely concerned about O-line. Yeah, I mean, like I said, snaps aren't everything, but I do think it's going to be a really important offseason of development for the Michigan offensive line. Pitt State Husker says, if I were Michigan, I'd apply for Canada for statehood and learn hockey a little more. Hey, they do have a really good hockey program, so I see their fans tweeting about it all the time. Every time they beat Ohio State and Michigan State, I see them tweeting about it. So they're proud of their hockey. Don't worry, Pitt State Husker. Doug Shepard says, I wouldn't be surprised if Illinois is in the Big Ten championship game. Jeff, what say you? Would that shock you?
I'm gonna save that because we'll hit on that in a little bit.
Okay.
So hang on, Doug Shepard Sr.
Yeah, don't worry. Doreen says, Ben Chrisman, a former Buckeye, passed away last night. Prayers for his family. Yes, I heard about that. Thank you for bringing that up there, Doreen. Yes, thoughts and prayers for Chrisman's family and everything going on there. Always a sad day to lose somebody of the Buckeye family. So yes, thoughts and prayers with them and their family as well, for sure. Let's see, anything else? All right, I think that's all we got comment-wise. Okay, we'll hit a commercial really fast, then we'll come back and we will get into Jeff's 5 big questions for the Big Ten next year. Stay with us. Home Field is your go-to destination for premium collegiate apparel with a passion for comfort and a flair for vintage design. Home Field brings you gear that is comfortable and stylish. With over 150 colleges to choose from, Home Field digs deep into the archives, uncovering forgotten logos, iconic mascots, and legendary moments to create one-of-a-kind apparel. Use my code TBTH for 15% off for new customers, or use my link in the description. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle. We appreciate you being with us, and we do want to remind you that if you do not catch the live show or you can't watch on YouTube, you can always listen on podcast. Unfortunately, you don't get the nice graphics, you don't get the spreadsheet like I have here next to me that Jeff has put together for his questions, but you do get to listen, and you don't have to look at my face. So I don't know how you feel about looking at my face. I'm not going to ask you how you feel about looking at my face. I'm just going to let you make that decision, and if you decide you don't want to see it, fine by me. Just listen on podcast. All right, Jeff, we have 5 questions to get to. I'm going to turn it over to you. You lead the way here, and then when you want commentary from you, you just let me know.
All right. Well, thanks. This is great. So hopefully you all can see this table I put together here. It's chock full of some pretty good information. To do this, I didn't want to be too over analytical, but let me go through, because I'm going to reference this table a lot real quickly, what's on here. First of all, it's in order of 2025 Big Ten championship odds according to Odds Shark. So from January, from last month. So Ohio State is number 1 only because they're the favorite. You can see it goes all the way down to Purdue. So that's the order. The Big Ten finish in 2024, conference finish, is the first column. You can see the regular season records, the conference records from last year for you all to reference. The head coach, what year they're entering next year. So the number 27 there by Iowa and Kirk Ferentz, and the only other one with more than 10 years, interestingly, is James Franklin. He'll be entering his 12th year. Real important. So the conference record of their in-conference schedule next year. So this is the record of the Big Ten record of the teams this year for teams that they're playing next year. So Ohio State is playing 9 games against teams that had a cumulative record this year in the conference of 38-43, if that makes sense. And then the rank is how tough it is. So from 1, the toughest schedule in the conference, to 18 is the easiest. And then I think a big factor is, how many games do you have against blue bloods? And all this ties back to one of the truths I had last week, which is the unbalanced schedule from the Big Ten being so large. You have 18 teams, but you're only playing 9 other teams. Who you play and don't play really is going to dictate a lot of how your season goes, and even if you make a Big Ten championship or if you can make the playoffs. And then another factor is just purely, are you playing one of the, I'll call it the big three right now? That's Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State. Michigan normally would be there, but they're in a little transition now. So no offense to my Michigan friends here, but those three teams, in some ways, depending on where you are, if you play them, it's almost like your fans will say that's a L, right? That's a loss, right? So that's a big deal. Games versus Blue Bloods. The toughest non-conference games, that comes in the factor. If you're going to make the playoffs, that really matters, right? If you get the third loss playing Notre Dame, for example, for USC, that could come back to haunt you. And then returning quarterback experience. I'm huge on this. If you have I mentioned this earlier, if you have a first-year starter, no matter how talented you are, they're going to have growing pains. So Ohio State's in that category, most likely, right? Julian Sainz probably going to be the quarterback. Super talented kid. There's going to be issues, though. He's going to be up and down. That's just the way things work. So that's the table. So my first takeaway, what needs to happen, and this is the number one story in the Big Ten. Just like last year, Ohio State loading up, $20 million roster, Can they get it done? Natty or bust, right? I don't know if it's that way for Penn State, but what needs to happen to Penn State to follow the Michigan and Ohio State model in which they brought all this talent back, right? They gave away a lot of money too. They're just not dumb enough to actually say what that figure is like Ohio State did. But can that parlay into a national championship? Because really at this point, that's kind of the expectations. I don't want to say it's natty or bust, but the fans expect them to, if not win it, to make it to the national championship game. So the question is, what needs to happen? So number one, Drew Aller must take the next step. So he's entering his third year as the starting quarterback. He really did raise his game this year overall, but unfortunately, he played mostly really well against not the most important games of the season. So just as an example, against Ohio State, right? At Ohio State, huge game. He went 12 for 20 passing, 146 yards, 0 TDs, and an interception. That's not going to get it done. That is not going to get it done. Oregon, he had a decent game. SMU, 13 of 22, 127 yards, 0 TDs, 0 interceptions. He had a good game against Boise, but let's look at Notre Dame, right? The national semifinal. 12 of 23, that's like 50% basically, 135 yards, 0 TDs, 1 interception at the end of the game, right? The infamous one. So across those 5 biggest games of the year, he had a 54% completion rate. He had 6 TDs and 4 interceptions. So basically he averaged a TD and an interception a game. That's just not going to cut it. He had a really good tight end, obviously, in Tyler Warren, but famously against Notre Dame, he didn't even complete a pass to a wide receiver. So that's another issue. But, he really needs to, when we say take the next step, it's not compiling a bunch of stats that add up real cool and look good on the overall stat sheet. It's in the biggest games in Columbus in November. Can he have a big game? And he needs to do that if Penn State is going to do what they want to do, which is win a national championship. Number 2, JR, the wide receivers need to step up. It's not all on Aller. Some of those stats is from the lack of receivers. It's kind of a combo. They lose Tyler Warren. Their other leading receiver, Harrison Wallace, transferred. They're picking up, and I know JR has covered this in prior podcasts, but USC wide receiver Kyron Hudson, Troy wide receiver Devontae Ross, and he has over 1,000 yards. These are good wide receivers. I just don't know if they're game breakers. So this is good, but this is still a question mark. So stepping up for the wide receivers still need to happen for Penn State.
Would you say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just quick talking point. Would you say that you think Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson will be better options this year than Harrison Wallace and I don't even know who I'd label as their number 2. Was it Julian Fleming or Amari Kelly last year?
I would say no on Julian Fleming. He pretty much blocked people. Yes, it is an upgrade, but I don't know if it's an upgrade versus Penn State's receivers from last year combined with Tyler Warren. I think
Yeah,
it's a
it's gonna a
team.
lot is gonna hinge on Luke Reynolds. You're right about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And again, I know they've got a big time 5-star tight end. I think a tight end can make a better impact than a quarterback in year one, but a tight end still has to block and know who to block and pick up. And I don't know if I want to trust the tight end to know, the blocking scheme, right? I mean, you're a part of the offensive line when you're a tight end. So I don't want to say you can just plug in a 5-star freshman and have him even come close to what Tyler Warren can do in year
Mm.
one. You know what I'm saying? But that's a great question, JR. I mean, I frankly, I think they need to do more after the spring game, if Lord knows if we're going to have spring games, but after the spring, I
Spring
think
showcase
yeah,
for
spring
Ohio State.
showcase. They
I think
they
that's just gonna
probably
be like the Pro Bowl.
they need some more help, I think, to
Yeah.
be honest, right? They need
Yep.
more weapons. The third one though was, Jim Knowles, great hire. Absolutely. But whether you hire a D coordinator or offensive coordinator, there is an adjustment period. When Knowles came into Ohio State, they were definitely better instantly. But in the biggest games, similar to Drew Hauer, in the biggest games, Jim Knowles did bad. He had this philosophy of, oh, we can give up a few big plays. We're going to be real aggressive and get some big plays by being aggressive, but we'll give up a few big plays and it'll be okay. Well, not in big games, not when you're playing Michigan, and the difference between winning and losing is really tight. That might work at Oklahoma State. I think he did learn from that, but frankly, even in the year CJ Stroud was in his second year, I blame Jim Knowles for their loss to Michigan, bringing the house when Ohio State's up in the first half and causing an explosive play for Michigan and all of a sudden igniting a fire under them. It's just unforgivable in my book. So maybe he's learned from those mistakes, but Jim Knowles adjusting quickly and getting that talented Penn State defense up to speed is going to be very important. It doesn't necessarily magically happen in year one. Even the Ohio State offense under Chip Kelly took a while for it to click, right? Late in the season. And then the fourth thing is just the big game hump for James Franklin, right? They need to beat Ohio State and Columbus November 1st. If they don't, they're not going to be in the Big Ten championship. Their seed might not be as great. They get into I still think if they lose Ohio State, they're still going to make the playoffs, but you're looking at a much different path potentially than if you have a higher seed. Penn State under Franklin is 1-15 versus top 5 opponents, 4-20 versus top 10 opponents. He's 4-17 versus Michigan and Ohio State. They got to win the big games, including winning in Columbus. And then finally, just being battle tested is a key thing. At first, when I saw Penn State, their schedule, their non-conference schedule, look at their toughest. They're in the blue row. Their toughest non-conference is against Nevada. Some people are like, oh, that's great. They're going to win all these games. But you want to be battle tested. But the good news is, and I do think this is good news, the fact that they're playing teams with a record of 45-36 is good. They're playing Oregon and Ohio State, which are two of the monsters. But you need that to make you tough when you're playing whoever, Texas in the playoffs or whatever. You don't want to march through too easily before getting to the playoffs. So that's my take on Penn State. JR, what says you?
Yeah, just real quick, I was going to say just how much this really does kind of feel like Ohio State last year and Michigan before, right? Week out of conference schedule. I would say Ohio State had a tougher in conference schedule than Michigan had, but that was also kind of not really the case at the beginning because Indiana popped up and became such a such a threat. If Michigan had had a team like that pop up, that could have been something, but just nothing like that happened for them back in 2023. So yeah, just there's many similar things. I would not be surprised if Penn State takes a similar path to Ohio State and loses a game or two, makes their way into the college football playoffs, and then just really turns it on from there. I mean, it's going to take good coaching in order to do that, and James Franklin's going to have to show himself, right? To me, that's the biggest thing. Like wide receiver schedule, like we can talk about all that stuff, and I think all that stuff matters, but biggest thing to me is James Franklin just he needs to be that coach. He needs to be that dude who can make the decisions, be confident, and be the guy that the rest of the team can rely on for them to win these big games and win a national championship. Because it's what we saw Jim Harbaugh eventually do. It's what we saw Ryan Day eventually do, right? They both got over the hump eventually. James Franklin just needs to get over that hump.
Yeah, I probably could have added in Kotelnicki, the offensive coordinator, coming up big in big games too, because he came up small in the biggest games. But again, learning curve, right? I mean, you learn by losing, and then good coaches take what you learned and apply it going forward. And if they don't do that, then they're not a good coach. So, it is set up pretty well for Penn State, for sure. So let's go to number 2 there, JR. So I'm going to say, what mid-tier Big Ten performing teams in 2024, I'll define what that is, could step up big in 2025 to challenge for the conference title and maybe make the playoffs. So I'm calling mid-tier if last year you won anywhere from 6-3 in the Big Ten to 3-6, and then if at least your overall record was 5-7 or better. So I'm lumping in Michigan to this. There's 10 teams in the light green rows. Those are the mid-tier teams. In Michigan fans, I'm not calling you a mid-tier program. You just had a mid-tier year last year. I know you beat Ohio State, but you won 8-5. So I'm putting you in that mix.
In fairness, you have Iowa in there as well, and they went 8-4. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. And really, when I say make the playoffs, if you go 10-2 in the Big Ten, you've got a great chance to make the playoffs. If you go 9-3, it's potluck, as we kind of learned last year with the SEC teams. So, I didn't want to overthink this too much. Like I said, I mean, returning start, like I could have looked at things like returning starters, new additions to the portal. I think, later on in the offseason, we can look at those other factors. But I was looking at schedule difficulty, year of head coach, quarterback experience, those type of things that I went through earlier. So let me give you, and I'll walk through these teams, but I'm going to here's the ones I think who have the best shot to surprise and challenge for the conference in the playoffs. In this first team, I wasn't going to think I was going to put them on there until I actually looked at their schedule. But who has the number 1 easiest schedule, according to my criteria, in the Big Ten? And that is Michigan. Yep, Michigan is playing teams with a 27-54 record from the prior year. I mean, they're easily actually have the easiest schedule, if you will. Of course, they play Ohio State, but they avoid the other 2, the big 3. They only play one of the big 3. They avoid Penn State and they avoid Oregon. Those 2 teams are loaded. Their other blue blood they're playing is USC, and USC, while has great potential, we all know last couple of years have been a struggle for them. They do have Oklahoma at Oklahoma as a non-conference game, right? So that's going to be a factor in, can they keep it to 2 losses or less? But we've been talking about Oklahoma earlier, right? In Venables, they basically were a 500 team last year. Do have a new quarterback. It's really an unknown how tough Oklahoma is going to be, but that game could dictate, a third loss for Michigan as far as making the playoffs for sure. And then the other thing why I put them as most likely to make the jump, though, in addition to that schedule, they're starting that Mikey Keene. I know they've got the 5-star recruit. I don't think he should be playing initially at first. Mikey Keene needs to be the starter, and only if Mikey Keene fails do they need to go to the 5-star. But 2 years at UCF, played quite a bit. 2-year starter at Fresno. They're the person they need. So they're not going to have a true first-year starter. And then, that Michigan defense, despite losing a ton, they still were quite talented. They did well against Alabama in that game. I do think Milroe missed a lot of throws, which has played a factor in that. but Michigan's going to be salty on defense, right? So I really, maybe based on that schedule, I'm putting Michigan number one. Number two, best shot to make a move is USC. So if you look at USC, their schedule, they have the 14th most difficult schedule, so pretty easy schedule. Teams are combined 37 and 44 from last year. They do play Oregon and they do play Michigan, but Michigan is still an unknown, and they're not one of those big time juggernaut blue bloods. USC does play at Notre Dame though, so I probably like USC's chances to battle and maybe get into the Big Ten championship game potentially. Notre Dame could serve as that third loss potentially for USC. But the other reason I'm putting them up there, JR, they had like four or five games, I should know the figure, where they were ahead in the fourth quarter, right, and ended up losing the game. They easily could have had a much better record than their 6-6 record. And then Jaden Maeva, very talented kid, only in his second year starting, but he's not a first-year starter at least. So I put USC second. Third would be Nebraska. I'm putting Nebraska third. Again, they're tied with USC for a pretty easy schedule, 37 and 44 are the teams they face. Of the big three, they only face Penn State, right? So they don't have to play Ohio State or Oregon. Their non-conference game is home against Cincinnati, so manageable. I'd like to think they would get 3 wins out of conference. And then Raiola, mentioned it earlier, second year, that's when you make the big step, right? That's when you usually see the biggest leap. So I'm putting Nebraska third most likely to make the leap. Iowa,
can I say one thing really quick?
Yeah.
I probably would have had Nebraska number one if they held on to Tony White. If Tony White was still their defensive coordinator, I probably would have had them be number one this year. I still think they're in contention for number one of those mid-tier teams. But, losing Tony White, the addition of Dana Holgerson, as you've been stating, Dylan Raiola, possibly making the jump this year in his second year. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I wanted to point that out, that I think Nebraska had a chance if they hadn't lost Tony White to, possibly make a name for themselves to be that team to expect in the mid-tier to make the jump up.
Yeah. And to be frank, I put a ranking here just because it's good for people like to react to rankings, right? Yeah, you wouldn't have to pull my arm to adjust my rankings that much, right? I mean, it's a fine line between a lot of these teams, to be honest. So good point. I put as the next one Iowa. The leeriness there is they've got the second toughest schedule based on last year, right? The teams they play this year had a 47 and 34 conference record last year. So it includes Penn State and Oregon. That's a big reason for that, right? So they're playing 2 of the big 3, and then always a salty at Iowa State team, right? I mean, all bets are off in that game. So that could be the third loss that knocks them out of the playoff potential. But they've got the big, so this is the key. It's the Mark Gronowski. Let's face it, it comes down to that quarterback. South Dakota State, 4 years experience. I looked him up, JR. He's got oodles of experience. Yeah, it was North Dakota State, but remember, they're playing big playoff games, pressure games, right? I mean, he's an experienced dude, and that's what they need. I guess I could have looked at who in the hell he's going to throw to, right? I mean, like similar to Penn State.
Pretty much the same as receivers last year. They're Reese Vanderzee, those guys. They'll have another year of development. Hopefully that'll be good for them.
Yeah, and then the really good coaching behind it, right? I mean, joke about Kirk Ferentz, but he's a good coach. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And then his defensive coordinator Parker, excellent as well. So number 5, so kind of in the middle of these 10, Washington, not a bad schedule, 38 and 43 of the teams from last year, so kind of middle of the road. On the downside, they play Ohio State and Oregon, so 2 of the big 3. They avoid Penn State. They play at Washington State though, so that should be one. I like to think that they could come 3-0 out of the non-conference, so that bodes well. a first-year starter. I know, is it Damon Williams, super talented?
Yep,
Damon
Damon Williams.
Williams. That'd be the thing. That's why I wouldn't put him higher. In Washington, really, they had a tough schedule last year. I feel like they were a little better team than last year. The problem is their lines of scrimmage just weren't very good. When they faced a team with a really good defensive or offensive line, they just really struggled. I'm putting number 6, JR, Minnesota. Not a bad schedule there for the Gophers, 37-44 against teams. So, on the easier end of things, they are playing Ohio State and Oregon, though. So that's tough. Toughest non-conference is at California. California's quarterback, though, transferred to Indiana. So that's a good thing. But they're coached well. I know PJ Fleck takes a lot of flack. I don't love him, but I think he's a good coach. I really do.
Yeah,
In fact, I know he's a good coach. Yeah. But Max Brosmer, who went to my high school here in Atlanta, and I know Max, they're replacing him. Big thing to replace that. That's their biggest issue. I mean, they've got a bunch of question marks when it comes to really not experience. So that's going to be the challenge for them. And there's only so well you're going to do without that quarterback, experienced quarterback. So let's go the toughest road. So I'm going to jump to who I think is going to have the hardest time to make the leap from this mid-tier. I'm saying the Wisconsin Badgers, because I looked at their schedule. Yowza. I knew it was tough.
Not easy. It's not easy.
The teams they are facing in conference had a 51-30 record last year, the tops in the conference. They play Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan. Even worse, they're at Alabama. That's an L. I mean, that's just an L. It's a brutal schedule. The other challenge is their traditional rivals are tough teams. Iowa, Minnesota. We just talked about them, right? And throw Nebraska in there. So those 3 teams aren't easy. It's a tough thing. I'll come back to Luke Fickell in a second here in Wisconsin, but that I put them as the hardest thing. Rutgers, kind of the opposite. Rutgers had an easy schedule this year, not this year. This year, I'm putting them, let's see, Rutgers, 3rd toughest schedule, facing teams that were 46-35 last year. They play the big 3. They play Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State. That's not good. That's probably 3 L's right there to open the year, from the get-go, if you know what I mean. Miami of Ohio as their non-conference is good. On the positive side, Calic Manis, 3rd year starting quarterback. That's a good thing, right? So that would be the thing that gives them hope. They need to do well in those teams outside of the Blue Bloods that they're playing. Number 8 on the list, so 3rd toughest to break through would be UCLA. They middle of the road schedule, but they do play Penn State and Ohio State. A road game against Utah. I know Utah had a down year last year, but maybe they bounce back. I did like the job that Deshaun Foster did, though. I think they have a good coach.
They had similar to a Wisconsin schedule last year with
brutal.
Everything
they
had going on. So them just getting 5 wins last year was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and they did get a good transfer quarterback, or at least an experienced one. App State's Joey Aguilar. I think I pronounced that correctly. Yeah. So that's a good thing. Ethan Garber.
Wide receiver too, Caden Robinson, who was a huge option for him.
Yeah, as long as UCLA makes progress, right? They don't have to make the leap this year anyway. If they were to go 6-6, they're just fine. And then Michigan State. I don't know what to think of Michigan State. I kind of put them like 7th most likely to break through, which means on the low end, not a bad schedule there. 43-38. Okay, so they're playing teams over 500. So 7th toughest schedule. They're playing, Penn State, but they avoid Ohio State. They avoid Oregon. And then they have Boston College at home. I know they played them away. So reasonable schedule. The wild card is Aiden Childs. So he's in his 2nd year. I mean, the guy was an interception machine last year, though. So, but in your 2nd year starting, like Big Jeff says, you're supposed to make the leap. So I just have some questions about his leap, but he's really talented. JR, what do you think? What
Got good
are
guys on the
any
outside too.
glaring that you really disagree with heavily? Like,
No, not really. I do think that, like I said, Nebraska, better chance up there, but I want to see what their defensive coordinator does. Where'd you have USC again? Were they second for you?
second best chance to make a breakthrough, actually.
Yeah, I might give a better chance to Iowa. Well, but Iowa has a really tough schedule, so yeah, that's the hard part. I think Iowa's going to be a better team than USC next year. Unfortunately for them, I'm not totally sold on their quarterback situation. I think Jada Mayava did some really good things at UNLV, and he has the opportunity to, get much better. But I think USC's quarterback situation is going to kind of be boom or bust next year. And if Lincoln Riley does this year like he did last year, he could just throw Jada Mayava under the bus, just like he did Miller Moss. So,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens there. I like Washington. I like Damon Williams, Jonah Coleman. I just don't know if I believe in that offensive line. After I
Their
took a
lines
look
were not good. Yeah.
at some of those numbers, and their defensive line I think is deep, but they really lack a true kind of star player on that defensive line. So a deep defensive line, which is good, but I just don't know how Washington's going to do on the line of scrimmage this year, especially away from home. They're going to have a good home record. Again, they're like the second longest home winning streak in college football, I think, right behind Georgia. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, no major disagreements from me.
One other one that I left out on USC that could be fact. Year 2 for D'Anton Lynn, who did a good job.
Yes.
Defenses under a second-year defensive coordinator can also make a bigger leap, and they made real good improvements. So that was another one I had listed I didn't mention. All right, let's jump on to number 3. Number 3, big question. After really good 2024 seasons, can Oregon and Illinois take the next step in 2025? Now, we saw those offensive lines for Oregon and Illinois. They were way on the left there as far as a lot of experience, right, JR? So I didn't even list that, but you could add that to here. That bodes well for that. But let's tackle Oregon first and say under Dan Lanning in 3 years. So he went 10-3, then 12-2, then 13-1. And we all know he won the Big Ten in Oregon's first year in the Big Ten. That's awesome. Was ranked number 1 for the last third of the year or whatever it was. He's 35-6 overall. He's 85% win rate. I mean, by all accounts, he's right on schedule. I mean, Ryan Day won his title in his 6th year at Ohio State. Kirby Smart won it in his 6th year at Georgia. So Dan Lanning's only entering year 4. He's on track here. But what's the next step? And it's like winning the Big Ten title would be great, but maybe it's not bad not winning the Big Ten title, right? Rest your guys and get ready for the playoffs. But it's going deep into the playoffs. That's what he needs to do. At least make the semifinals, really, to make the next step. Maybe for Oregon, I would say it would be to make the finals, but let's be fair. He's going to be playing a quarterback who's maybe in his 2nd year starting in Dante Moore, depending on how you look at that UCLA year. JR, I know you said he started a lot, but but he's still pretty young quarterback, right? And so I don't know if I want to say, yeah, truly next step means to be fine in the finals, but he needs to win a couple playoff games is the bottom line. So that's what I'm saying. And here's the reasons for optimism. Great coaching staff and continuity. I don't think they've lost anyone super major. Reasonable schedule. They have Penn State and USC, but no Ohio State. So their teams they're playing, and Oregon here is in the kind of like yellow, I guess, orange row there. 44-37 are their opponents. So a little bit, better than average, but still, they're a tough team. And then Oregon State as their non-conference, that should be a win, right? So I don't think they're going to get that, third conference loss if that could knock you out of the playoffs. Elite recruiting, talent across all position groups. They're recruiting every position group really well. I think they've been top 5 the last 3 years for sure under Lanning. They do have the 2nd best title odds, and so I like their chances of making hay in the playoffs. But that's Oregon. So Any comments on them before I jump to Illinois, JR?
No, when I did my video about Oregon, I just said Dan Lanning's there. He's gonna cross the threshold at some point. For Oregon fans, you just gotta be patient. It's gonna happen at some point. And just keep supporting your team. Just don't turn into fire Dan Lanning for losing 1 or 2 games a year. He's gonna get there at some point. It's just gonna take time, and that's the kind of the beauty about this 12-team playoffs. I think it gives more coaches that opportunity to break through. And Dan Lanning's definitely one I could see break through with like a 6 or a 7 seed or something like that at some point.
Yep. All right, let's jump to Illinois then. So under Brett Bielema, 4 years into the job, they've gone 5-7, 8-5, 5-7, and then last year 10-3, including the big bowl win over South Carolina, 6-3 in the conference. By all accounts, really a great year for Illinois. So he's 28-22. That's a 56% winning percentage. So what would be the next step for Illinois? So for Big Jeff, I'm saying based on going 10-3 and 6-3 and almost making the playoffs, next step is making the playoffs. Okay, making the college football playoffs. So they need to go 10-2. And I'm not saying win a game. That would just be icing on the cake. Just making it there would be huge for recruiting for Illinois. And what are the reasons for optimism? So, I mentioned it earlier, 18 overall returning starters. I mean, that's used. I don't know if that's leading the conference or not. I didn't look up that stat. The return of 2-year starter Luke Altmaier, steady quarterback, completed 61% of his passes, 2,700 yards passing, 22 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. 6 interceptions. That's big. Any Brett Bielema team, he has the Wisconsin background. It's controlling the ball, right? Strong defense. 6 interceptions tells me he's making the right decisions as a quarterback. That is what you want, really reliability, and you can do a lot with that. Remember, Bielema and his staff know what they're doing too, and he knows how to win in the Big Ten. And Arkansas, his record may not have been that great. Just to recall, he won 68-24 at Wisconsin. That's a 70. He won 3 out of 4 games at Wisconsin, right? They do have the second easiest schedule too. 33-48 are the teams from last year he'll be facing this year. So second easiest schedule. That, as we know from Indiana, that's a huge factor in why IU did what they did, right? And then of the big 3, they only play Ohio State, right? That's another factor as well. So I have 6 key games for them beyond Ohio State. There's also at Duke, can be tricky, right? At Indiana, USC at home, at Washington, and you mentioned that streak that they had, JR, and then at Wisconsin, which is always what's interesting is think about this. Brett Bielema at Wisconsin, November 22nd, second to last game of the year. That could be the game that either parlays or Illinois to making the playoffs, or Wisconsin can shut out Bielema from making the playoffs. Second, the last week in Madison. Pretty cool if it came down to that.
That could be quite the revenge for Wisconsin fans if that happened.
There's some strong feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are for sure.
Any comments on the Fighting Illini?
No, I think the Illini have a good shot this year. They got to capitalize on it, right? They've put together some good years, two good years these past 3 years, and Brett Bielema's doing a good job with his team, and he's talking on social media, and so he's obviously feeling himself and feeling his team a little bit. So I think they're set up well. They just got to execute this year, right? Just make it happen.
What's funny about it? You just said that. I think Bielema is like the Lane Kiffin of the Big Ten. And think about it. Lane Kiffin's fighting to get to take the next step too, right? Trying to get in, posting on why he thinks his team should be in the.
I don't think he takes himself as seriously as Lane Kiffin does, though.
Maybe not. Well, yeah. I mean, who is really correct. Who is like Lane Kiffin? All right, number 4. Lincoln Riley and USC. Is it time for Lincoln Riley to follow the CEO model that Ohio State's Ryan Day used this year and give up primary play calling responsibilities. Now, he probably should have done this by now if he were going to do it, but I'm still going to challenge and say maybe he should be doing this. I think it's between Riley and Mike Locksley of who's the second hottest Big Ten hot seat, in my opinion. He was considered the home run hire that we talked about last week, and there's no such thing as that. But just to recall, 5 years at Oklahoma, 55-10, 85% win percentage. He was basically winning like Dan Lanning has in the Big Ten. 3 playoff appearances. I know they got no wins, but still, when you make the playoffs. And in his 3 years at USC, he's 26-14, 65%. Hasn't been close to a Big Ten title. One top 25 finish when he had a Heisman winner, right? And he's really focused this offseason. I think this is a good thing on upgrading their personnel department, right, for recruiting. Chad Brown coming from Notre Dame, becoming the general manager, getting a guy who's an assistant AD of recruiting. He grabbed a Wisconsin general manager, Max Steneker, as executive director of player personnel. So a lot of recruiting focus. And I listen to everyone's podcast, believe me. Locked On USC is one I think is pretty good. That guy is adamant that the biggest issue with USC is play calling and game management. And he's the biggest advocate for Lincoln Riley to give up play calling responsibilities. And I think he might be right. I mean, how many examples can you give me of a coach in college football? Because being a head coach in college you have way more to manage than, I would argue, than an NFL head coach. So I know Andy Reid calls plays for the Chiefs, but he doesn't have to worry about, recruiting and preventing someone from leaving in the transfer portal. But really, Steve Sarkisian in Texas, right? And they're a success, but they have gotten beat in the semifinals, right? So they're not gotten, JR, what other examples? I was trying to think of college, really successful head coaches that are also offensive play callers. Can you think of one beyond Sarkisian?
Yeah, Sark is the best example. Ryan Day there for a few years. He did make a national championship game. I think he was the first play calling head coach to ever win a playoff game until Sark did it in the 12 team, but Ryan Day was the only one that did it in the 4 team. Does Kiffin calls his plays, right?
A good point. Kiffin calls his plays. Yes,
but,
that's good.
I mean, Ole Miss drops games they shouldn't. Sometimes, like Kentucky this last year. So, I mean, I don't know how Ole Miss fans feel about that, but if I'm going to guess, that probably a contributing factor there.
Yeah. I would just say, so Ryan Day, gave up the play calling to Chip Kelly. It really allowed him, famously, after the Oregon loss, to step in and look at some of the things they did, tweak them, right? And it turned Ohio State into the elite defensive group that everyone thought that they would have. Play calling just takes a lot of time and prep, and you're free to be more of a true CEO. It can help in recruiting too. Just play calling, there's so much to it. It takes a lot of time, and a lot of the play callers don't do a lot of recruiting because they want them to spend time, especially during the year, on putting together great game plans. So, I do think this is something he should think about. His offensive coordinator, they named the quarterback's coach Luke Huard, the Huard family. He got the added title of offensive coordinator. I don't know if that guy's ready, but he could have him be heavily involved in planning the game planning, and then just to alleviate some of the load that Lincoln Riley has. I'm thinking, their easy schedule would present a great opportunity. I think time's ticking, but bottom line is I think Riley's too stubborn to probably do this. But other than
everything I've read has been that Riley's going to call plays again, and he's not really close to giving it up, it sounds like. So, I agree with you, Jeff. I think it needs to happen. But I don't know if Lincoln Riley's going to let it happen. He's going to have to really find somebody he trusts, kind of like Ryan Day finding Chip Kelly and eventually being like, yeah, I guess I can do this. But, Ryan Day also went up against Eli Drinkowitz in that bowl game, who, he had to listen to the entire time in media days talk about how good of a decision it was to give up play calling. So did that impact Ryan Day to give his up? Maybe Lincoln Riley needs to have a meeting with Ryan Day, and Ryan Day tell him, "Hey, buddy, it helps you out to give it up."
Yeah. But only if he has one more bad year, and I agree. Like I said to start this, if he was going to make this move, you would kind of know it by now, probably, right? I mean,
Yeah, I
but
agree.
you never know what could happen. And I just think for his future success, if he wants to take USC where it wants to go, I think this needs to happen. It just won't happen this year. All right, let's go to the final one. Our friend Luke Fickell in Wisconsin. What needs to happen for Wisconsin in 2025, and what record does Luke Fickell need to ensure his reign continues in Madison? So hottest seat is on Luke Fickell. His 2-year record is 12-13. I went over this last week, but his 3 prior predecessors, so Paul Christ, Gary Anderson, and Brett Bielema, those were the 3 prior coaches. In their first 2 years, if you combine all their 2-year records, 61-18. So those 3 guys were winning at a 77% clip in their first 2 years, and Fickell's under 500. I mean, I give him a D-. Maybe he should get an F so far for what he's done. I think he only gets a D- maybe because his recruiting's been pretty good, to be frank.
I said with Luke Fickell, I said first year I don't put so much on him. You lose your quarterback and you find out your backup wasn't very good. That stinks, but you know what? You can correct from there. I put the second year on him more because he knew his backup quarterback wasn't very good. He trotted another new starter out there and kept his backup quarterback the same. I get it. Like you hope your quarterback doesn't get hurt. But thankfully this year it seems like he's learned his lesson, right? Like he's got Danny O'Neal in addition to Billy Edwards, but I don't know. Like, is Danny O'Neal better than Braden Locke? I think so. But it just,
Yeah. Let's do
yeah.
a little comparison here. So the Phil Longo experience, we're going to do the air raid. That was an utter failure. I didn't mind the idea, though. Let's try something different. But once it he should have pulled the plug a little bit earlier. But I really expect, Grimes came from Kansas, so they're going to reestablish what I call Badger football. Strong running game that will also help out the defense. So let me show you some stats here. Back in 2021, so this is 3 years ago, so really 2 years before Fickell came on board. But Wisconsin averaged 211 rushing yards a game in 2021. That's second in the Big Ten. Their defense gave up 241 yards a game, first in the Big Ten. Now, it was helped by the Big Ten West schedule. That there's not offensive juggernauts in the Big Ten West as we all recollect, but still just complementary football, like strong rushing game, control the clock, keeps your defense off the field. They can stay fresh and really wreak havoc, which they did. Now, 2024, most recent year, 154 yards per game rushing. That's 8th in the Big Ten. Basically, they were an average Big Ten rushing offense, right? Their defense gave up 343 yards per game. That's 12th in the Big Ten. Basically, over 100 yards more per game under Fickell in his second year. So the air raid's been a disaster, not just from an offensive perspective, but its impact on the defense, right? The defense goes back on the field faster when you're not running the ball and controlling the clock. And in fact, this past year, Wisconsin averaged 23.5 points. That's their worst since 2004. So their worst offense, really, points-wise, in 20 years, right? By the way, Kansas, so with this new Jeff Grahams, Kansas last year averaged 212 rushing yards a game. That's right in line where Wisconsin was 3 years ago, right? And that was 12th in the nation. So you can expect Badger football this year for sure. The problem is, the brutal schedule. So, and the other thing is they still need an effective passing game. So Billy Edwards Jr., as we all probably know, transfer from Maryland, had some good success there. 3,300 yards passing, 19 TDs, 10 touchdowns or 10 interceptions. Not the greatest greatest ratio, but they can't be one-dimensional, right? to beat the top teams or the upper echelon teams, you need to do more than just run the ball. It needs to be supplement with the play action, right? So the wide receivers need to step up. This is similar to Penn State. Vinny Anthony will be the number one option. He had 39 catches for 672 yards. They have a slot, Trek Kekahuna, a host of transfers, including Jaden Ballard from OSU. Whatever needs to happen, they need to have some reliable receivers downfield, just that threat of passing so that the better opponents just can't say we're going to shut down the running game and then we beat Wisconsin. I'm saying they
have the offensive line to do it. Like they had a really good pass blocking offensive line. The run blocking at times left a little bit to be desired, but I think that was more scheme than offensive line. So they have the offensive line to do it. Just to your point, those wide receivers need to step up and be the playmakers that are able to get open for the guys, right?
And I watched a few games. They're literally dropping passes. That Will Paulding guy who had a good year 2 years ago, and this year he was just dropping balls, and he's transferring to Notre Dame. Maybe a confidence issue, like a new change of scenery. It was weird. I mean, they were getting poor quarterback play, and when the guy would make good passes, they were dropping the ball. It was incredible. Very frustrating. You know, I do, given the schedule, Wisconsin's realistic. If you say we're going to get rid of Fickell, it always, and it's true of anyone. Like when they're saying fire Ryan Day, I'm like, okay, well, who are you going to get? So you better think about who you're going to get before you fire a guy. It's kind of the same with Wisconsin, right? I think they really do believe in Fickell. They believe that he tried something unusual to make them take the next step. It didn't work. He won't get a second chance again, but I do expect them to be better. You just won't see it in a record this year. If they go 7-5, he's safe. Even 6-6, if they still look good in their big games, I would, as long as it looks like they're doing well, recruiting remains strong, I think he's okay. Because again, what are they going to do? Who are they going to hire if he doesn't work, right? So that's what I got, JR. Any other comments on the Badgers?
No, I just, I brought Rajiv on one of my shows, and we were talking about the offensive coordinator situation. Rajiv over at the Bucky Report, if you want a Wisconsin content, he does a great job, him and Justin. But yeah, he was just telling me that, they really like Luke Fickell there, and they believe in Luke Fickell. But, the fact of the matter is, if he doesn't produce, they're going to have to move on because, they moved on from Paul Chryst, who was somewhat producing, but it wasn't enough. Well, if you can't produce at all, Wisconsin's too proud of a football program to just be okay with, 2 seasons in a row of not, going to bowl games. So, and they had the longest bowl game streak, and Luke Fickell ended it last year. So, it's unfortunate for Luke Fickell. We'll see what he can do this year, but it's really not looking good. I think Wisconsin fans will be happy if they make a bowl and they'll give him another year. But if he goes 5-7, 4-8, or if this season starts off really, really poor, which it could, that out of conference is not easy. It's not going to be good for him.
It's crazy that my last 2 questions basically are all about coaches, what they need to do to keep their jobs, and those were the 2 latest home run hires in the Big Ten, right?
Yeah.
Lincoln Riley.
That's the thing too, is Lincoln Riley. He's not losing his job anytime soon because of that buyout. As much as he probably should, if
different
things
reasons
don't go
for
well.
why they want to keep coaches, right? Yeah, Lincoln Riley, and
Exactly.
I think USC still believes Lincoln Riley can win big at USC. I do think they believe that still, right?
I think the recruiting changes and stuff like that will help too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. Anything else on this one, Jeff?
No, that's it, and that's what I got.
All right, good deal. All right, bring that there, bring that here. All right, everybody. We hope you enjoyed the episode. You hope you enjoyed Jeff's questions. I think they were very good. Did a great job, and always love having Jeff come on. We will have Zach back with us next Sunday. So if you guys have been missing Zach, don't worry, he's coming back. We will have Zach back, and then you'll see Jeff from time to time, whether it's on this one or maybe just in a video with me or something like that. We love having Jeff on over here, so it'll be a good time to do that. So Jeff, anything else for the audience before we get out of here?
No, I just hate to look at my what the score of the Indiana basketball game is, so no one
Oh, they're
knows.
winning. They're winning
Okay.
50-46.
There we go.
Yeah, they're talking about it in the chat. So, I mean, it helps that Michigan State doesn't know how to put the ball in the basket. They're shooting like less than 30%. Oh, no, they've gone over 30%. They're shooting 35% from the field right now. But yeah, not
Well,
good.
yeah, similar to USC in football, though, we've been ahead before, and we'll find a way to not win the game. So,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's probably what's going to happen. Tell people where they can find your stuff one more time, Jeff.
yeah, so bigjeffsfootball.com is the website. Got a lot of good stuff. I'll end up putting an article out here, and I post some pretty good tables of information and everything, like I showed you here. But then on X, you can see Big Jeff's FT Ball on X, and yeah, definitely love covering it and supporting what JR does. So keep the hope, everyone. One of my truths from last week is any Big Ten team can make the playoffs. I mean, Purdue got a new coach. They're going to try to follow the Indiana model. So everyone should be hopeful now in this new 12-team playoffs, no matter what your previous history with your team is.
Everyone but Wisconsin. Wisconsin's my only one that can't do it next year.
Next year,
I'm taking. Yeah. I'm just messing. And yes, Joe, thank you for correcting me. IU isn't winning. Michigan State is just losing. That's actually accurate. So, all right, everybody. Hey, we're gonna be doing this all off season. So if you guys want, college football content, I know the numbers aren't nearly as good in the off season, but as far as I'm concerned, I love doing these shows. I love interacting with you guys in the chat and everything. Even if you miss an episode or miss a couple episodes, still come back. We love having you here, and we love talking college football, especially Big Ten football, all year round. So be here. Big Ten basketball channel, the Big Ten Huddle -basketball as well. You guys can go check that one out, and yeah, it's gonna be a good time. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. Go watch Indiana and Michigan State. We'll see who comes out on top on that one. Have a good one, everybody. See ya.